Hi, Billy
Mitchell, I've been asked to be transparent.
When I say the phrase video game cheater, a number of different names might come to mind, but for many of you, one name that'll come to mind immediately is Billy Mitchell. Acclaimed video game cheater and Donkey Kong player, featured heavily in the documentary King of Kong from 2007. I use quotation marks because a lot of people have claimed it's more of a movie than a documentary that doesn't really accurately depict a lot of the facts, but that's where he kind of came to prominence for the first time. He's recently sued an Australian YouTuber who many of you watching this video might already be familiar with, Karl Jobst, here in my home country of Australia. For those of you who don't know, 3 of Billy Mitchell's most prestigious scores, those being the King of Kong 1,047,200 score, the Mortgage Brokers 1,050,200 score, and the Boomer score of 1,062,800 have all been proven to not have been performed on original arcade hardware definitively. There's a very good video by Veritas that goes into this evidence in detail, but a summary of essentially what was discovered was that if you slowed down the footage of any of Billy Mitchell's scores and analyzed it frame by frame, it didn't line up with what we would expect a regular, unmodified Donkey Kong machine to produce. And so the theory that he played it on MAME, which is a form of arcade emulation, is suggested as being the most likely turn of events, but since these scores were submitted to the arcade leaderboards, it seems a form of cheating because there are much more stringent and different requirements for proof standards as far as emulation scores on the leaderboard. They're separated from the regular arcade leaderboards. Now, Karl Jobst is a YouTuber who makes videos talking about speedrunning, video game accomplishments, and cheating scandals in the video game scene. But to understand this lawsuit, we have to get into some background context regarding another YouTuber who made videos in the same kind of categories, that being Apollo Legend. A few years before Karl Jobst ever started making videos of this nature, Apollo Legend was the first big content creator on YouTube that was making videos targeting and singling out and exposing Billy Mitchell's cheating. Now, back then, a few years ago, the evidence against Billy Mitchell wasn't quite as concrete as it is now, and a few years back, Apollo Legend ended up getting sued by Billy Mitchell as well. Now, that lawsuit got settled out of court, and as part of it, Apollo Legend agreed to take down his videos on Billy Mitchell and not to make any more in the future. Later down the line, Apollo Legend ended up tragically, for reasons I won't get into in this video, taking his own life. Karl Jobst, in 2021, made a video briefly talking about and covering some of these events, and I will play the clip, including the statements that will give you all the context you need for where this lawsuit has come from. Here's the clip.
He also sued YouTuber Apollo Legend for $1 million. I haven't spoken about this publicly, but this lawsuit ultimately ended with Apollo giving in and settling with Mitchell. He was forced to remove all of his videos about Mitchell's cheating and paid him a large sum of money. This left him deeply in debt, which required him to find extra work. But with his ongoing health issues, this was all too much of a burden, and he ultimately took his own life. Not that Billy Mitchell would ever care though. In fact, when Billy Mitchell thought Apollo died earlier, he expressed joy at the thought. The lawsuit against Apollo was just as frivolous as the rest, and Apollo definitely would have won in court, but again, he was extremely ill and couldn't handle the ongoing stress.
Now, one of the things that you may have heard in that clip was that Karl Jobst claimed that Apollo Legend had to pay Billy Mitchell a bunch of money as part of the settlement of the lawsuit. Now, this turns out wasn't completely true, and because of this, Billy Mitchell was able to start a defamation lawsuit here in Australia against Karl Jobst for those statements. Karl Jobst ended up retracting that part of the video and even removing it later on. Billy Mitchell claims that the damage has already been done, and so the lawsuit was scheduled for the distant future of 2024. It is now November of 2024 and all of the court proceedings have completed. We are just waiting on a verdict from the judge. Now, thanks to Ursat's Cats, author of PerfectPacman.com, who was able to fly down from America down here to Australia and attend the trial every single day that it was happening, and writing ferociously detailed notes, I'm able to tell you what went down and give you a summary of the entire trial from the first day to the last. On day one, we got a lot of testimony from Billy Mitchell about who he is and how certain comments by Karl Jobst affected him. Billy's team brought up, with reference to the Karl Jobst video that I showed earlier, 2 specific points. The first being that the settlement with Apollo Legend that Karl Jobst mentioned didn't require him to pay money, and that this false statement, apparently, played into the second point, which is that Karl Jobst made an insinuation that because of this lawsuit that Billy Mitchell had filed against Apollo Legend, that caused Apollo Legend to be so stressed and so overwhelmed that he eventually took his own life because of Billy Mitchell's actions. And this paints Billy Mitchell, according to Billy's team, as not just somebody who's a video game cheater, but as somebody who will hound somebody to death, essentially, and that image is much more of a damage to his reputation than any of the cheating allegations that had been talked about by both Karl Jobst, Apollo Legend, and also people throughout the course of the last few years. So that those specific statements by Karl Jobst, those are being alleged to have been much more damaging than any of the other statements being made. This is an important distinction to make because this is something that's unique to Karl's video that separates it from claims of cheating from other people. So this whole lawsuit has nothing to do with whether or not Billy Mitchell cheated, or whether or not Billy was a cheater, or anything like that. Specifically, this is isolating the claim that Karl Jobst made in his own YouTube video about Billy Mitchell regarding the lawsuit with Apollo Legend and the eventual tragic outcome of Apollo Legend. Billy Mitchell takes the stand for the duration of day one, and he gives, for the most part, just a testimony about who he is and his accomplishments, as well as commenting on various other events that occurred, such as the Twin Galaxies decision to remove his scores in the first place, and how that affected him. He states that while the decision that Twin Galaxies made at the time did affect him negatively prior to Karl's video coming out, that affected him only temporarily and not very much, and his reputation didn't see any sort of long-term harm, according to him, as compared to Karl's video. Specifically, Twin Galaxies removed his scores from the database, but then, after legal threats, they ended up putting up a sort of historical database, which Billy Mitchell will claim in this lawsuit was equivalent to Twin Galaxies completely reinstating his scores, which is not true. They put up a sort of separate historical database, essentially a snapshot of what the leaderboard used to look like before Billy Mitchell's scores were taken down. What also ended up happening around the same time was Guinness World Records, who relied on Twin Galaxies as a source of information for video game high scores. They took down Billy Mitchell's scores as well. However, Billy Mitchell ended up threatening to sue Guinness for removing his scores, and they buckled to the pressure immediately and reinstated his scores straight away. He points to this as sort of a remedy to the harm that was initially caused by Twin Galaxies harming him in the first place by claiming he was a cheater. And he says that Karl Jobst, on the other hand, makes unique claims that damaged him in a unique way, different to the Twin Galaxies suit. One thing that also came up was that Billy Mitchell was asked about how he learned of Apollo Legend in the first place, and he says that in 2018 it was due to him finding videos of him calling him a cheater when Billy Mitchell sent him a cease and desist letter, and then some point after that, he had heard from people and from Reddit, apparently, that Apollo Legend had died when he had not yet. This was in 2018. And Billy Mitchell sent a few text messages gloating about this supposed news, hoping that it was true to a few of his friends. And this makes him look like an abhorrent person. Later throughout this trial, Karl's team is going to use this as evidence to claim that Billy's reputation was already really bad prior to any of the videos that Karl had made, and that this damage to his reputation wasn't caused by anything Karl said, but rather his reputation was already really bad because of things that he had said initially, especially in these text messages. Billy Mitchell dismisses this, saying that it was just dark humor, and that Karl Jobst's video frames this in a very different way, which is very debatable. Billy recalled filing a defamation complaint against Apollo in Florida back in 2020, and Apollo Legend took down all the videos against Billy Mitchell, or recovering Billy Mitchell, and issued a statement as well. Billy Mitchell was then asked how he learned of Karl Jobst, and he said that he learned of Karl Jobst for the first time on Twitter, when Karl Jobst was making posts commenting on Guinness's decision to reinstate Billy Mitchell's scores. Billy Mitchell then found out that Karl Jobst had made videos on Billy Mitchell, one of which we've talked about already, that being the defamatory video in question, and so Billy Mitchell had his lawyers send a concerns notice, which Billy Mitchell himself authenticated. Karl Jobst tweeted out at that point in time that he had received those notices. Billy Mitchell is asked by his team on the stand how Karl's video affected him, and he says a lot of things at this point, that he experienced emotional turmoil, lost weight, lost sleep, and was throwing up due to those videos, which is a pretty extreme reaction. But he said all of that sort of happened. And he was also asked about specifically what kind of appearances he missed out on because of these videos. And Billy Mitchell listed two interesting but somewhat suspicious examples of emails he'd been sent by some people who had booked to have him appear. Specifically, Billy Mitchell talked about John Weeks, who's the former owner of the Pinball Museum, and he apparently had planned to have Billy Mitchell host a liquidation auction and was going to pay him $50,000 for that appearance, although apparently, after the Karl Jobst video came out, sent an email to Billy Mitchell cancelling that appearance, and Billy says this is, he cites this as him losing $50,000 for this appearance. He also mentions another person named Ryan Berger, also somebody who was planning on booking him, but with a similar sort of email being sent saying that he was going to cancel the appearance based on the Karl Jobst video talking about the Apollo Legend situation. An important thing to note here is that one strange kind of circumstance, which is revealed a bit later in the trial, is that there isn't any evidence to suggest that Billy Mitchell was booked in the first place by either of these two people. The only evidence we have of any sort of booking or cancellation as such are these two emails that were sent kind of one after another. And from this is my sort of opinion, what it seems to look like is that Billy Mitchell had a couple friends, these two guys, who he asked to send these two emails so that he could point to them as a source of lost revenue. It would be strange that he wouldn't have some sort of evidence to back up the fact that he was booked by these people in the first place and then had those bookings cancelled. Something like an appearance fee or just any sort of documentation whatsoever, which is the case with a lot of other venues that he did show up at later. So these two emails were extremely suspicious, and I would take them with a very large grain of salt. At the very end of the day, we got a teeny tiny bit of cross-examination from Karl's team, where Karl's barrister asked Billy Mitchell about the appearances that he had made since the video came out, noting that there were a substantial number of them, although Billy claimed for every appearance that Karl's barrister did bring up that he either wasn't paid for it or that it was unplanned and he just sort of happened to be at a convention at the time because he was meeting friends and then just happened to pop up on stage and partake in some sort of events that were at the convention, but he said that he wasn't paid for any of those and they were totally unplanned, and that the planned paid events were specifically the things that he lost out on. In the morning of the second day, Billy Mitchell is caught on his phone and gets in a little bit of trouble with his lawyer, reminding him to put it away. The judge reminded everyone that only accredited media is allowed to be on those kinds of electronics, so Billy Mitchell's caught in a little bit of a slip up here, because it's not allowed. One thing that does happen as well, it's a bit notable, allegedly somebody in the courtroom saw Billy Mitchell receive a text message from his son, which stated, "Don't tell them we talked," to which Billy Mitchell apparently replied no, and then deleted the texts. Obviously, this is kind of a huge problem because you're not meant to corroborate your story with the witnesses who are meant to be testifying, and in this case, Billy Mitchell's son was going to be testifying, so this is kind of a problem, but you know, this is a hearsay, so there's nothing that can be done about it now. It was just apparently cited in the courtroom that this happened. The judge ruled as well on this day that Karl's team was able to make reference to the Twin Galaxies deposition during cross-examination against Billy within reason. Karl's team went ahead and asked Billy if he amplified the incorrect statement that was originally in Karl Jobst's video, because for those of you who don't know, Karl Jobst removed the claim that we watched earlier in this video from his original video, and the only place you can see it now online is in Billy Mitchell's response video. And Billy Mitchell says that obviously he did not. He states that only people who saw the original video would have seen his response video, to which Karl's barrister responds by playing a clip from him in the video stating, for those who haven't seen it, here's the clip.
For those of you who haven't seen it, here's the clip.
Now this is obviously like a slight contradiction if you want to get really nitpicky here, because if it was only people who'd come from Karl's original video to Billy Mitchell's response video, then there wouldn't be any people who hadn't seen it. Unless, of course, there were new people coming straight to Billy Mitchell's response who hadn't seen the clip yet, and in which case, that was maybe a minor amplification, but the implications of this are very minor. Karl's barrister asks Billy about the text messages that we saw earlier as well, and Billy Mitchell claims that it was all just dark humor and he was just joking. He didn't think that Apollo was actually dead, and he deeply regrets making those joking comments. And a kind of a thought now that kind of comes to mind is, if it is just dark humor, why regret it? You know, if it wasn't made to, if those comments weren't made to be serious comments of his like real thoughts at the time, why regret it? Billy Mitchell says that he regrets it just because it did turn out 3 years later that Apollo Legend did end up taking his own life, so they just were unfortunate in retrospect. However, that being said, Billy Mitchell had no way of knowing at the time that he made those comments whether or not Apollo Legend actually was dead. Had he actually turned out to be dead, so it would have been an insane comment to make at the time. But you know, it is what it is. Now, those text messages were shown in the Karl Jobst video, and it's going to be difficult now for Billy's team to distinguish whether or not Billy's reputation was damaged by the false claim that he had to pay him a bunch of money as part of the settlement, Apollo Legend to Billy Mitchell, or if those text messages being shown off that painted Billy Mitchell as this unsympathetic monster were what caused his reputation to get worse, if it did. At the end of Billy Mitchell's response video, he says that he'll respond how people anticipate me to.
I plan to respond the way that everybody anticipates for me to respond.
And the clear reading from this is that he's going to sue Karl Jobst, which is in fact what ended up happening. This is brought up as a point to support the idea that Billy Mitchell is someone who's very litigious, who will work to silence his critics and force people to reinstate his scores through the use of legal threats. And from what we've kind of seen over the years, this seems to kind of be the case. And this defamation lawsuit against Karl Jobst could be another point in favor of that notion. Karl's barrister also asks Billy Mitchell to confirm whether or not the offending words from Karl's video were removed, to which Billy Mitchell replies that they were indeed removed. Karl's barrister then asks whether or not Billy Mitchell was paid for an appearance at Music City Multicon in 2021, and Billy Mitchell says he wasn't paid for this appearance. He wasn't a featured guest, he just apparently, according to him, showed up to the convention, was there to say hi to a few friends, and just ended up kind of playing games there and had a stall there with merchandise to sell, but he wasn't a paid person to appear there at the convention, and he wasn't a featured guest. However, in direct response to this, Karl's barrister shows Billy Mitchell and the courtroom an invoice with an appearance fee of $4,000 for Billy Mitchell to appear at the convention. And Billy Mitchell replies to this by saying, "Oh, you meant the other year," which is a hilarious response. He alters his testimony at this point to say that he was paid for 1 year, but not the previous year in 2020, which is what he was trying to claim all along. However, when you take this information into account, the narrative and timeline for Karl's video affecting this appearance no longer makes sense, because if he wasn't paid in 2020 before the video came out, but was paid in 2021 after the video came out, that doesn't support at all the claim that Karl's video did affect his appearance negatively enough to cancel his appearance. It's now just totally irrelevant because it doesn't fit in the timeline. To the point of Billy Mitchell's credibility as a narrator, Karl's barrister asks about Southern Fried Gaming Expo and how the Twin Galaxies statement back in 2018 and 2019 affected him, and he says he was booked for Southern Fried Gaming Expo in 2018, but not in 2019. Karl's barrister then moves to an exhibit showing claimed damages from the Twin Galaxies proceeding that was settled out of court, and it shows that Southern Fried Gaming Expo for both years, 2018 and 2019, are claimed as lost revenue damages, despite Billy Mitchell not having had a confirmed booking for the 2019 convention. When Billy Mitchell is confronted with this evidence of his inconsistency, he claims that he didn't put this together, which points out that he's just inconsistent on the facts and booked appearances, and throws his credibility as a reliable source of information into question. On the third day, the texts between Billy Mitchell and his son were mentioned by the judge, saying if that was the case, then the client, Billy Mitchell, would be held in contempt, but this didn't amount to that, and Billy's barrister simply assured the judge that he was instructed by his client that there were no such messages being sent. Karl's barrister also pointed out that Karl Jobst did publish an apology and a retraction. However, it was published in a video that was unrelated to Billy Mitchell, and it was just kind of tacked on at the end. However, this video did end up getting well over 2.5 million views, which is way more than the original video did. Karl's barrister asked if Billy Mitchell sued Donkey Kong Forum, where accusations of cheating were brought up among Donkey Kong players, and Billy Mitchell said yes, he did. Did this harm his reputation? He says yes, for a short time among just that crowd it did. Karl's barrister also brought up Jeremy Young's article about his cheating, the Apollo Legend videos from 2018, the original ones from prior to Karl Jobst's video, and various clips from King of Kong, the documentary from 2007, all sources of negative publicity for Billy Mitchell. These were all things that were around before Karl Jobst's video was ever created. Karl's barrister also brought up the emails and points out what I kind of mentioned earlier, that they weren't really preceded by any sort of written agreement that these appearances were going to happen, and in fact actually points out that in the Twin Galaxies deposition, Billy Mitchell attributed the loss of these appearances due to the Twin Galaxies statement. However, Billy Mitchell says he doesn't recall this and says that the events were actually pushed to summer of 2021 which just so happens to be after the publication of Karl Jobst's video, which is very suspicious. And he says that apparently in the Twin Galaxies deposition, when he was asked about that appearance specifically, he was referring to Karl Jobst's video, although it was never explicitly stated or explicitly asked about, which is a stretch, to put it mildly. Karl's barrister also brings up the point that all of the stress and sickness that Billy Mitchell attributed to Karl Jobst's video, he almost word for word attributed to the Twin Galaxies ruling about his scores initially getting taken down from the database. And in fact, as part of that deposition, in the same kind of segment that he was being asked about this sort of stuff and describing his illness and whatever, he was asked about the effect of videos published by the likes of Karl Jobst and David Race, which is another person he was suing at the time. And he said at that time that those had a minimal emotional distress effect compared to that of Twin Galaxies at the time, which is hilarious because that completely contradicts exactly what he said earlier in the previous day. Billy's side, for the most part, tried their best to dismiss all the supposed harm from all these other things, to explain them away as best they could, although it didn't come across as very convincing from reading through the article. And Billy Mitchell's son was also talked to on that day and was asked about Billy Mitchell's reputation and about the settlement with Apollo Legend, and it seems he was mostly the one keeping his dad up to date with the videos coming out about Billy Mitchell. He also corroborated the story about Billy Mitchell freaking out after he saw the initial video from Karl Jobst. In day 4 of the trial, we got some testimony from a wide range of various characters from the Billy Mitchell cinematic universe, starting off with Walter Day, who testified about how he knew Billy and how the video from Karl Jobst affected Billy negatively. He said that Billy was upset by it when it came out and he felt unwell. For those of you who might recognize the name, this is the referee, the official referee of Twin Galaxies from the King of Kong documentary. Karl's barrister asked him about his reputation overall, and Walter Day said his opinion was very high of Billy Mitchell and that he attended multiple events with Billy, even as recently as 2023 at the NERG event in the UK, where he was paid $1,000 and had all of his travel expenses paid for the event. When Karl's barrister asked specifically about the Karl Jobst video, Walter Day said he had no recollection of the actual video itself, reaffirmed his positive assessment of Billy's character, despite controversies. The second witness of the day was Michael McNutt, who's the founder of All-Star Comic Con, which is an event and convention that invited Billy Mitchell before in the past. Michael McNutt was asked about Billy Mitchell and said that he had invited him in 2019 for a $5,000 appearance fee and that they flew him out and paid for all of his expenses. They reiterated that all of Billy Mitchell's interactions with fans were positive and that it was an overall good experience. And when asked if they would invite Billy Mitchell back, McNutt said yes, there's no reason why we wouldn't. The implications of that statement are very funny given the circumstances that Billy's team is trying to portray, as Billy is claiming that he's losing these appearances and being unable to show up at these events for paid promotions and those sorts of things, when it seems like all of these people who've had him in the past are willing to have him again. During cross-examination, Karl's barrister just simply pointed out and highlighted the fact that Billy Mitchell would be invited back to All-Star Comic Con despite the video and despite numerous controversies in the past. We also get to see a little bit of cross-examination of Billy Mitchell's son, who said that he helps his dad with legal stuff as well as social media, although his mum, or Billy Mitchell's wife, handles most of the social media stuff. He was asked if he was familiar with the lawsuit against Jeremy Young and Donkey Kong Farms, and Billy Mitchell Jr. agreed, although he didn't see Billy Mitchell react quite as adversely, or adversely at all, during those lawsuits. At this point, something funny happened. It was pointed out that Billy Mitchell's complaints against Jeremy Young and Donkey Kong Farm were basically identical to the complaints that he filed against Apollo Legend years later. If you're looking at these side by side, I promise you these are different screenshots. Karl's barrister asked if Billy Mitchell threatened to sue Guinness, and his son confirmed, and the point of Billy Mitchell's reputation as a litigious person was pointed out to Billy Mitchell's son, and he agreed that that's how he came across, that he used the law to silence his critics, essentially, which is really funny that he would agree to that. Billy Mitchell's son said that they had hired a PR firm to ensure positive news about Billy Mitchell traveled far and wide, so this kind of shows that they were concerned with Twin Galaxies statements, at least about Billy Mitchell, and they were concerned with those being a negative impact on his reputation at that point in time, which was a few years before the Karl Jobst video came out. This again kind of goes to show that what Karl's defense team is trying to paint a picture of is that Billy Mitchell's reputation was already pretty bad prior to any of these videos coming out, and that it wasn't Karl Jobst's video specifically that made his reputation any worse, or that it even had any noticeable impact whatsoever. We got a few more witness testimonies as well, which weren't super interesting, but we had Preston Burt, who's the co-founder of Southern Fried Gaming Expo, and he testified that they had a good time with booking Billy, had him as a guest multiple times, and would still have him back even in 2025, again, despite the video and the controversies. We also heard a little bit from Steve Grunberger and Triforce, but nothing too interesting there. Just a bit more character statements regarding Billy Mitchell and that they had positive opinions of him. And now we get to some slightly more interesting information. We finally have Karl Jobst himself, the man, the myth, the legend, finally on the stand talking about some interesting information. Karl's barrister called Karl to the stand, and Karl talked a little bit about how YouTube monetization works and what he does on the platform for a living and so on and so forth. He talked about how he followed the Billy Mitchell story because it was in his line of interest, that being like gaming and gaming scandals and that sort of stuff. So it naturally kind of fell into the area of expertise that he covers in his videos. We also got to see the source of the defamatory statement. We got to see some images of a Reddit comment that Karl asked in direct messages with another person involved in the Billy Mitchell sphere. It seems as though this is where the idea of Apollo Legend being forced to pay out a large sum of money came from initially, and so following this, Karl was asked about editing the statement out of the video. To which Karl said when Keemstar, of all people, told him that Billy was unhappy with the claim, Karl was happy to take the words down pending an investigation, and that he would take any steps necessary to rectify that matter going forward. However, what ended up happening, despite Karl removing the quote from his video, Billy uploaded to YouTube announcing that he was going to respond the way everyone expects. Karl understood this to mean that Billy would file a lawsuit against him, and added that in his opinion, Billy's reputation is that he sues people willy-nilly. Karl was asked about where he got this opinion of Billy from, and Karl cited the fact that Billy had sued multiple people in the past up to this point. Karl at that point decided then to restore the claim and put that part of the video that was removed back in, which he at the time still believed to be true. Karl decided that since the steps he had taken at that point had failed to mitigate Billy's response, he would instead leave the claim up until he could get some sort of better confirmation that it was true, or that it was false. Eventually, though, on June 13th, he did receive correspondence from Apollo Legend's brother, actually, that the claim was incorrect, and upon receiving that information, Karl immediately edited out the specific claim out of his video. The next month then, in July, Karl posted his apology as part of another video. He was asked why he posted a retraction at all, and Karl said in court that he doesn't like to spread misinformation, and that he has a reputation as somebody who's trustworthy and who doesn't do that. He was asked on the stand why there was a delay in bringing this apology out, and Karl said that he wanted to make sure that the retraction was included in a good video, quote unquote, and that it takes time to make a good video, so he wanted to make sure that as many people as possible would see the retraction. Karl was also asked about Billy Mitchell's reinstated scores, which he at that point clarified was not a correct characterization of the situation. And then towards the end of the day, we got a little bit of cross-examination from Billy's team as they tried to essentially paint a picture that since Karl's job is to make videos about gaming controversies, he has a higher incentive to essentially paint Billy Mitchell negatively and make more videos on Billy Mitchell as he essentially profits from that sort of thing. On day 5, we got a lot more cross-examination of Karl Jobst by Billy's team. Billy's barrister pointed out he'd made around 20 videos on Billy Mitchell at this point, and they showed the thumbnails on the screen in the courtroom. Billy's barrister was trying to make the case that the apology and retraction video was designed to be unseen as it wasn't in a Billy Mitchell branded video, which he had clearly no trouble making as outlined by the sheer volume of them on his channel. Billy's barrister asked why Karl's barrister made so many videos on Billy Mitchell, and asked him if he made more money off of Billy Mitchell related videos as opposed to his regular videos, and whether that case would be the reason why he would be incentivized maybe to embellish certain stories or facts more so in Billy Mitchell videos. But Karl Jobst denied all of that, saying that other videos of his that weren't Billy Mitchell related did better, and just in general, any videos that he made kind of did roughly the same, and that Billy Mitchell videos weren't necessarily doing better or worse than the regular videos he was making on his channel. This kind of discussion went on for a long while in the court. Karl went into a lot more detail about why he did or didn't make videos at certain times about Billy Mitchell and other topics at the time. But to summarize, Billy's barrister was basically trying to make the case that Karl Jobst was going out of his way to make more videos on Billy Mitchell than on other topics. Karl Jobst said no, this was not the case. Billy Mitchell is just a figure in the gaming scene, so covering him is part of delivering gaming news, and so if Billy Mitchell sues somebody or is involved in some sort of cheating scandal or some new evidence comes out about his cheating, then that's all relevant to the space of gaming journalism, and so that's why Karl himself was making a lot of videos about him. A second and kind of important point that's brought up here, but is also brought up throughout the later part of this day as well, is that Karl Jobst is involved currently in this lawsuit against Billy Mitchell, so naturally he's spending a lot of time going over Billy Mitchell's footage and facts and statements and all that sort of stuff, so he has a lot less time to devote to other topics that he would otherwise maybe be covering, as opposed to Billy Mitchell, because he's involved in this lawsuit. So there's a sort of overlap here as far as like focusing on facts related to his case and making videos about Billy Mitchell as well. Billy's barrister also asks about a quote where Karl Jobst says Billy Mitchell ruins lives and refers to him as legitimately evil and as a scumbag. He asks if those were hyperbolic, and Karl Jobst says no. David Race was also called to the stand via Zoom by Karl's team as a witness to testify about Billy Mitchell's reputation in the arcade gaming scene, and David Race kind of elaborates and talks about sort of what we already know about Billy Mitchell, about his kind of reputation as a cheater and a shady person in general. So nothing new comes from that, but it does help boost Karl's case a little bit. The Karl cross-examination continues afterwards, and he's asked a bit more about his motives and about his response specifically to Billy Mitchell. Karl, however, remains steadfast for the most part and kind of reiterates what we already discussed. At one point, he's asked about this image of Billy Mitchell and Apollo Legend with the quote on it with the words, "He is suing me." And he's asked why the words "he is suing me" is placed over it, but Karl points out that it's from an Apollo Legend video, not his, which is obvious because if you look at it, the line going from me is pointing to Apollo Legend, not to Karl Jobst. I thought this was really funny. An interesting point that's brought up as well is that apparently Billy Mitchell didn't try to contact Karl Jobst, which is legally speaking untrue, since there was a concerns notice sent to Karl Jobst on behalf of Billy Mitchell that was certified by Billy Mitchell himself, but Karl Jobst at the time didn't consider that to be from Billy Mitchell himself, and he had to concede the point that this was not an attempt by Billy Mitchell to contact him in court, which is obvious if you think about it, because if somebody contacts you through their lawyers, that's kind of considered the same as that person contacting you, which is what Billy Mitchell did, although Karl Jobst at the time didn't kind of, I guess, understand or see it that way from like a layman's perspective. Karl Jobst also clarified that he didn't believe that Billy Mitchell was responsible for Apollo Legend's death solely, but he did believe that the settlement between him and Billy Mitchell did have at least some impact, which, when you think about it, is not a crazy statement to make, because as part of the settlement, Apollo Legend had to take down his videos on Billy Mitchell, which were all doing really well, and he was not allowed to make any videos about him going forward, so he lost out on future revenue from those videos, which is just unfortunate. Karl Jobst also stated that the apology in his later video was directed specifically to his viewers for posting inaccurate info, but not addressed to Billy Mitchell directly. There's a really funny moment later on during the day where Billy's team asks Karl Jobst, "These proceedings are your crusade against Mr. Mitchell, aren't they?" And he refers to Karl Jobst's continuation of the proceedings, but this draws an immediate response from Karl's barrister, reminding the court that Karl Jobst is the defendant in this case, to which the judge agrees. Let's not forget, it is Billy Mitchell who's suing Karl Jobst, not the other way around. Billy's barrister's cross-examination of Karl Jobst ends, and Karl's barrister steps up again towards the end for some more direct questioning. Karl's barrister recalls Karl Jobst saying that he would have been making different videos during this time if he wasn't preoccupied with the lawsuit, which according to Karl Jobst earlier in the day had taken thousands of hours of his time. Karl Jobst also has an emotional moment at this point in the trial, and he has a bit of a tearful response, and I can only imagine the stress that he's been put through all the way from the last few years up until now by Billy Mitchell. It's commendable that he's remained so composed throughout this trial, at least from what I've read in the article. Day 6 was the second last day of the trial and the last really interesting one overall. It's the last day that we got any new witnesses, starting off with Moist Critical of all people, who was called to testify in court. He was asked about his involvement with gaming, and he mentioned Moist Esports and paying salaries for pro gamers in Apex Legends and Rocket League and Super Smash Bros. As well. He stated that he knew Billy Mitchell from the Cartoon Network lawsuit that happened in 2015, and he watched King of Kong, and that's kind of where he learned about Billy Mitchell in more depth. He stated in court that his opinion of Billy Mitchell was that he was a fairly negative individual and that he seemed pretty litigious, but he stated that the Karl Jobst video didn't change his view of Billy Mitchell from what it was before to what it was after, nor did Billy Mitchell's reputation change a great deal in the wider gaming space as a result of the video either. We then got a funny clip in court playing of Moist Critical farting into the microphone.
I'd like to start by addressing all of the individuals on Twitter that have been spamming me today demanding that I give Billy Mitchell an apology. This is my official response to all of you.
We got a little bit of cross-examination afterwards where Billy's barrister was asking Critical if he'd learned about Billy Mitchell only online, not in person, and Charlie agreed. Billy's barrister showed a series of comments that he procured from the video by Moist Critical, where we can see that there are some comments with very little engagement, mind you, linking Billy Mitchell to apology and suicide, and Billy's barrister wanted to enter these comments into evidence in court. However, Karl's barrister objected and said that if he was going to enter these comments into evidence, that all 5,000 plus comments from the video should be entered into evidence as well. Billy's barrister wants to establish something called the grapevine effect, which is basically that people are commenting on something from a previous video, that being the Karl Jobst video, now on Charlie's video much later, and this is kind of meant to be evidence of how supposed false information spreads on the internet. Charlie, Moist Critical, says in the video that he's waiting for Billy to sue him and he's asked about this statement. He says that his impression is that Billy will only sue people he knows he can outspend in court, which is why he thinks that he probably wouldn't get sued by Billy Mitchell because Moist Critical has a lot more resources to fight a lawsuit like this than somebody like Karl Jobst, for example. Billy's barrister asks Charlie about another video that he thinks that he made, where he watched Karl's video called The Biggest Conman. Billy's barrister asks about this video, assuming it was posted from Charlie himself, but Charlie explains that this is actually a re-upload of a segment from his Twitch stream, not his channel, that somebody else kind of recorded and posted on YouTube. Billy's barrister is confused by this, but chooses to say nothing further and dismisses this entire part of argumentation. You can see from the screenshot that's a different channel as well, that it's not from the original Moist Critical channel. So a slight blunder from Billy's team here, but it is what it is. Karl's barrister then calls Carlos Pinera as a witness. Carlos mentions that he first met Billy Mitchell years ago when the allegations of cheating were posted online. He met up with somebody called Robert Childs to help out with the situation and worked on investigating whether or not Billy Mitchell's scores were generated by an arcade machine or not. He says he rewatched King of Kong in 2018 after meeting Billy Mitchell and thought it was weird that you never saw him play Donkey Kong live anywhere in the movie, and he thought that he came across overall as a jerk, which is how most people probably took Billy Mitchell's appearance from that movie to be. Carlos said that at the time of the score dispute back in 2018, he didn't really know who Billy Mitchell was at that time or have much of an opinion of him, and then later in 2019 he started developing an opinion of Billy Mitchell as an untrustworthy player who was litigious, and the community opinion of him, in Carlos's opinion, was that he was also an untrustworthy person and a liar in general. He also reiterates, like many of these witnesses, that the 2021 Karl Jobst video did not change his opinion of Billy Mitchell, or even that of the greater gaming community, that they already saw him as a sort of suspicious liar and a cheater prior to this video coming out, and that's how they saw him kind of afterwards as well. What point sort of becomes apparent at this point in the trial is that a lot of people in the gaming community really don't like Billy Mitchell, regardless of how the public necessarily views him. People inside of the community have this very sour of opinion of him just in general already. Carlos, however, was initially on Billy Mitchell's side and tried to test on an actual arcade machine and actual arcade hardware that Billy Mitchell supposedly used himself, whether or not he could prove that Billy Mitchell's scores were originally generated on an arcade machine, but he ended up being unable to do this and to help Billy Mitchell, and so his opinion of Billy Mitchell eventually changed to be a lot more negative after working with him. One really interesting piece of information that came out, which was very disastrous for Carlos, was a document that was shown on screen where Carlos signed a statement attesting that there was no evidence that Billy Mitchell cheated, although Carlos admitted in court that he was apparently semi-pressured to sign this document. Billy Mitchell got him to sign this with the promise that some certain statements that Carlos requested to be changed would be. However, that didn't happen, and so Carlos essentially signed off on statements that he stated he didn't believe, even though he has a legal document saying otherwise. And while this all kind of makes Billy Mitchell look like a jerk, it doesn't bode well for Carlos at all, because he essentially admits to perjury in court, which has a disastrous effect on his character. The texts between Billy Mitchell and Carlos are actually brought up again, and Carlos claims at this point that Billy Mitchell, to his understanding, wasn't engaging in dark humor, and this was his understanding at the time and now. Karl's barrister also calls Jeremy Young, who's the person who originally started the dispute thread on Donkey Kong Forum. He confirms as well that the community felt that there was suspicious activity surrounding Billy Mitchell's scores at the time and that it required a closer look, hence the investigation and then the score dispute thread. In 2020, prior to the Karl Jobst video, it was his opinion that Billy Mitchell was an untrustworthy cheater, and apparently this was the opinion of the Donkey Kong Forum community overall as well. He's then asked about a small poll on the site, and this is a bit of a weird point in the trial. Here's what it looked like. Billy's barrister tries to use this to say that the opinion of Billy Mitchell was split, that there were some people who liked him, some people who didn't, and this was kind of an ongoing thing. However, a problem with this is that this poll was conducted on the site in 2017, which is before even the score dispute thread happened. And now you would expect, just looking at this, that once irrefutable evidence came out that Billy Mitchell really did cheat, that opinions would drastically change based on that. So there were a lot of comments surrounding this poll about who created it and when it was made that were all sort of incorrect, but I don't think this played a very large part in the trial despite being focused on it. The next witness was Apollo Legend's brother of all people. Apollo Legend's brother stated that Apollo Legend's YouTube channel was definitely his only source of income, and he knows this because at the time he had access to all of Apollo Legend's financial documents and his tax documents and his W-2 forms, and so he confirmed that it was his only source of income. He wasn't making money anywhere else. And he also stated that he knew that Billy Mitchell had a bad reputation well before the Karl Jobst video, and that was like the sentiment of the gaming scene at the time as well. Another witness that was called forth was Jimmy Nails, who is an Australian proprietor of the Netherworld Arcade in local Brisbane. He's also the organizer of the Australian Kong-Off, which is a Donkey Kong arcade tournament that Billy Mitchell actually attended back in 2018. He testified that he invited Billy Mitchell back in 2018 despite the score dispute thread that was out at the time, because he thought that it would be good business for the tournament at the time. Jimmy Nails stated that he was conducting feedback surveys as well that were anonymous, and confirmed that he got both positive and negative feedback regarding Billy Mitchell's attendance there. The last witness testimony of the trial was that of Elliot Watkins, who's a YouTube content creator with many millions of subscribers on YouTube, who also runs a talent management agency for other creators on the platform. He stated that he heard of Billy Mitchell in 2012 through King of Kong initially, and then just kept up with him throughout the years, as he was an interesting figure in the arcade gaming scene. He described in great detail how he followed the evidence of how Billy Mitchell's scores were not generated by an arcade machine, and was fascinated specifically by Billy Mitchell's avoidance of ever directly addressing that evidence. His opinion was that the community perception of him was that Billy Mitchell was a narcissistic and refused to engage with reality, as well as Billy Mitchell having a tendency to present things very dishonestly. It was specifically the combo of the evidence, Billy Mitchell refusing to address it, and threatening to sue people who brought it to light, which made it seem like Billy Mitchell was essentially the kind of person who would use the law as a weapon to silence critics. He was asked about Karl Jobst's video, and he confirmed it didn't change his opinion of Billy Mitchell, nor did he think that it changed the community perspective of Billy Mitchell at the time either. He did, however, mention something very interesting, and that was the text message exchange where Billy Mitchell was hoping for Apollo Legend's death and trying not to smile, revealed Billy Mitchell to Elliot to be a new level of evil, and he was quite shocked at that fact. At this point, I would like to say, if you're interested at all in reading any of this in detail, to please go check out perfectpacman.com. All of the articles on all the days are fairly interesting, and I've kind of skimmed over some certain details here and there, but if you're interested in reading any of it in more detail, especially any of the testimonies in a lot more detail, I would really recommend go checking it out. I'll post a link to it in the description as well, so please go do so. That was it for day 6, and for the most part, day 7 was just a recap by both sides of all the evidence that kind of came up. Both barristers were kind of making their closing arguments at this point, so no new evidence really came to light during this day. The judge chimed in throughout to ask questions and clarify details, and there were a few little missteps by Karl's team with getting the timeline of Karl removing the statement from the video and then putting it back. That got mixed up a little bit, but then it got clarified by the end. Overall, it seems like Karl's team has a really, really good defense, but Billy Mitchell's team doesn't have no case at all. From my perspective, just looking in, I obviously wasn't at the trial, obviously, but just reading through all the stuff that went down, I would guess that I think Karl's team probably has a fairly solid case to protect themselves against Billy Mitchell, although there are a few interesting points to keep in mind regarding this trial about how Billy Mitchell could possibly get a win of some small magnitude out of this. The important thing to keep in mind is that in Karl's original video, that statement that was edited out was technically incorrect, and so Billy Mitchell's argument that that could have caused some damage is the entire basis for this entire lawsuit in the first place, so it's important to keep that in mind. And if the judge thinks that Billy Mitchell's team did a good job of arguing that that was the case, then Billy Mitchell could be awarded a win if that's how the judge decides to hand the verdict down. There was a lot of arguing around whether or not Billy Mitchell's reputation was bad before and bad after, but specifically whether or not the video that Karl Jobst put out damaged Billy Mitchell in a way that could be seen as defamatory is what's going to be important at the end of the day. At this point, we're just waiting now for the judge to deliver a verdict, and when the judge eventually does, I'll probably make a video talking about that as well as the implications going forward of what that would mean. But obviously, just like you at home, I'm really hoping that Karl scores a win here, because Billy Mitchell has gotten away with a lot of insanity and lying throughout the years, so I hope that at least some justice is served towards Billy Mitchell. I'll keep you guys updated. I want to take this moment also to thank all of the people on Patreon who've supported me as well while I made this video. If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have been able to make it. If you guys want to support the channel in any sort of way directly, please do go check out the Patreon. I will leave a link in the description for that as well. Thank you to everybody who tuned in, and I will hopefully see all of you in the next video to come. Be sure to leave a like if you liked the video, and leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think of all this. If you want to go read more of the information on perfectpacman.com, please do so, and I'll be back with a new video very soon. Thank you all for watching, much love, ciao for now.